At Eden Air Force Base, she was known as the Quota Girl, a showcase pilot with no real recognition. But when a storm over the desert tore the helicopter out of the sky and the commander lost consciousness, it was Lieutenant Addison Wren who took over and saved the entire crew. What began with humiliation and doubt has become a legend. The Wren Protocol is now taught in all military schools. Welcome to my channel. I still remember the first time I walked into Eden Air Base. Combat boots caked in desert dust, the Nevada sun beating down like it had something personal against me. The hangar doors yawned open, the smell of jet fuel and hot metal already in my nostrils. And there I was, the only female pilot in the incoming Valkyrie Squadron class. The Quota Girl, as they called me when they thought I wasn't listening. Hell, sometimes even when they knew I was. You here to model the flight suits, or actually wear one? That was Lieutenant Moss, sneering as I passed him in the hallway. Big guy, broad shoulders, small mind. The others laughed, and I kept walking. If I'd stopped every time someone had something to say about my being a woman in the sky, I'd never have gotten off the tarmac. They had pictures of legendary pilots plastered across the training room. Heroes of Eden. All men. One guy nudged another and muttered, "Guess they needed a new face for the recruiting poster." I smiled at that one, not because it was funny, but because it reminded me of my dad, Captain Ira Wren. He used to say, "Kid, the sky doesn't care about your chromosomes. Only your controls." He taught me to fly in an old Cessna before I ever got my learner's permit. By 16, I could handle turbulence better than most men could handle bad coffee. But none of that mattered here. Not my honors from flight school, not the countless simulator hours, not even the ribbon I earned during a civilian rescue op in the Rockies. Here, I was just the girl. In every training session, I got the co-pilot's chair. Never the stick. Observational exposure, they called it. Sounded like something they gave bacteria in petri dishes. I kept notes. I studied their patterns. I memorized emergency protocols backwards and forwards. And when I spotted an overheating turbine gauge on a practice flight, I called it out. Captain Doyle, our lead instructor, cut me off with a smirk. "Write it in your notebook, Wren. This is real flying, not arts and crafts." I clenched my jaw so tight that night, I nearly cracked a molar. But I didn't say a word. I just watched the gauge. That night in my bunk, I touched the small tattoo on the inside of my wrist. A bird wing with a fracture line through it. Got it after surviving a stall-out crash in flight school. My dad used to say it was a miracle I walked away. I say it was muscle memory and stubbornness. The base mess hall wasn't any better. The jokes were louder there. "Careful, don't let her near the throttle. She might break a nail. What if she needs to fix her mascara mid-flight?" Every bite of my cold sandwich went down like gravel, and every laugh behind my back was a reminder that no matter how many hours I'd flown, I hadn't arrived yet. But I didn't come to Eden to be liked. I came because I was born to fly. Because when that bird lifts and the world drops away beneath you, it doesn't matter who you are down here. Up there, it's just you and the sky. They thought I'd crumble, but they didn't know me. They didn't know that I'd already buried the man who taught me everything I know about flying. Didn't know that I'd walked into more simulator fires than half of them had seen in real combat. Didn't know that when you've been told no your whole life, yes isn't something you wait for, it's something you take. The day after I called out that turbine gauge, one of the crew came up to me quietly. "You were right about the reading. We grounded that bird. Could have been bad." He didn't say thanks. He didn't have to. The storm was coming. I could feel it. Not just in the sky, but in me. They didn't believe I belonged in that cockpit. But I was about to show them. Not with words. With wings. The desert was playing nice that morning. Blue sky stretched wide above us. The kind of weather that lulls rookies into thinking they've got it all figured out. 4 Valkyrie-class helicopters in tight formation, dancing just feet above the red-dusted flats like we were on parade. I was in the left seat of Hawk 2, with Captain Doyle up front, hands on the controls, mouth running as usual. "If something happens up here, Wren, just make sure the coffee stays hot." I didn't answer. I just kept watching the instrument panel. My gaze caught the temp gauge, just like it had during training. Something about the slow rise tickled the back of my mind. Not enough to panic, just enough to make me tap the side of my helmet. "Captain," I said, "temp's climbing past safe parameters." He gave me that same dismissive wave. "Relax, Wren. I've flown through hotter hells than this." The other guys in the bird chuckled, like it was funny. Maybe it would have been, if the desert hadn't chosen that moment to wake up angry. The first gust slammed into us like a slap, the next one like a punch. Within seconds, the clear skies were gone. The horizon turned the color of burnt coffee, and then there was no horizon. Just sand. Endless, grinding, blinding sand. Hawk 2 jerked like it had been caught in a trap. Visibility dropped to 0. The windshield became a swirling canvas of beige. Our formation shattered. Radio static erupted in my ears as the other pilots scrambled for bearing. And then, Doyle made a noise. It wasn't a word. More like a gasp, sharp and awful. I turned and saw him seize. Hands frozen, mouth slack, eyes gone white. I shouted his name, but he was already gone, slumped forward, the bird pitching with him. No control. Panic doesn't wait for a polite invitation. It comes roaring in like an unwelcome guest, kicking doors and breaking china. But I didn't have time for it. Taking control, I yelled, more for myself than anyone else. I unbuckled, scrambled, grabbed the stick. It was like wrestling a dying animal, metal shrieking, alarms wailing, every warning light lighting up like it was New Year's Eve. Hawk 2 is going down. I heard someone scream over comms. Negative, I said through clenched teeth, though I don't know if anyone heard me. We're not going down. Not today. Everything slowed. I remembered Dad's voice. The storm isn't your enemy. Fear is. Trust what you know. I trusted. The altimeter was falling fast. I needed a place to land, anywhere. But all I saw was dust. I dropped us low, then lower. Terrain warning screamed. I shut it off. Didn't need a robot voice telling me what I already knew. A shape appeared through the haze, a canyon wall. Too close. I banked left hard. The bird groaned. We cleared it by feet. Maybe less. My jaw clenched so tight, I felt my molars crack. I leveled out, trimmed the throttle, scanned the gauges. The crew behind me was dead silent. Then the dust began to thin. And just like that, we broke through the back edge of the storm, sunlight pouring through the windshield like a gift. I looked down. We were still flying. Still alive. The comms buzzed. Hawk 2, do you copy? I grabbed the mic. Hawk 2 copies. Emergency in-flight medical. Pilot incapacitated. Preparing to land. When we touched down at the rally point, the skids kissed the ground like they were glad to be home. Medical crews rushed us. Doyle was alive, barely. His pulse thready, but there. I sat there, gripping the stick, not moving. The same hand that had been denied the controls for months had just saved 5 lives. Outside, one of the other pilots stood frozen, staring through the dust. He pulled off his helmet and just mouthed the word. Damn, they said it looked like a ghost ship. That's what the crew of Hawk 1 told Base Command. Said Hawk 2, my bird, rose out of the sandstorm like an apparition, blades steady, skids level, flying like it had never tasted chaos. But we had. Every rivet on that chopper had rattled against gravity's grip, and I'd felt the blood drain from my fingers as I forced her into submission. I climbed out of the cockpit on legs made of jelly. My boots touched the desert, and I nearly collapsed. Someone tried to hand me water, but I couldn't take it. My fingers wouldn't let go of the stick, even after I'd landed. Even after the medics took Doyle. Even after the other pilots stopped pretending not to look at me. For once, they weren't looking through me. They were looking at me. One by one, the rest of the flight team returned to base. Hawk 3 had lost a stabilizer and limped back on fumes. Hawk 4 circled back twice before making it through the storm. Every single one of them thought Hawk 2 had gone down. But there I was. And that changed everything. By the time we returned to Eden, word had already spread. I stepped off the transport and felt it like static in the air, mechanics pausing, ground crews whispering, salutes that weren't sarcastic. I found a quiet corner in the barracks and sat down on my bunk. My hands still trembled. The adrenaline hadn't let go yet. I stared at the keychain Doyle always kept clipped to the overhead console, a tiny silver blade from an old broken rotor. They said it came from the first chopper he ever flew. Somehow, during the chaos, it had landed in my helmet. I kept it. Didn't feel like theft. Felt like something passed on. Later that night, Captain Bowers, our second in command, found me in the wrecked tent. He was the kind of man who didn't say much unless it mattered. He sat across from me with a cup of black coffee and didn't speak for a long time. You kept it in the air, he said finally. Did my job, I replied. He nodded. Doyle's alive because of you. And so's the rest of your crew. That ain't just doing your job. I didn't know what to say, So I just stared at my own reflection in the black surface of his coffee. Tomorrow, he said, the brass wants you to walk them through the emergency sequence. Full simulator reconstruction. I looked up. Why? Because nobody flies through what you did and walks out without losing the bird unless they know exactly what they're doing. I swallowed hard. They finally want to hear what I've got to say? They have to. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was nervous. Because for the first time since I arrived at Eden, I felt something I hadn't dared to feel before. Purpose. Not to prove them wrong. To prove to myself that I was right to believe I belonged here. The sim room was cold. Always was. Cold and dark, like the inside of a cargo hold, lit only by the glow of the triple screens, each displaying the cockpit of a Valkyrie class in ridiculous 4K. I walked in wearing my flight suit, but I may as well have been naked for how exposed I felt. Every seat in the observation row was filled, base command, flight instructors, engineers, and the brass from Western Command who'd flown in just to see the girl who didn't crash. No pressure. They told me to recreate the emergency sequence exactly. Every move, every control input, every decision. So I did. I slid into the simulator and adjusted the seat. The yoke felt different, cleaner, smoother. But I gripped it like it was real. Because for me, it was. Start when ready, the technician said over the intercom. The screens lit up, desert skies, the whine of engines, the clean symmetry of a perfect formation. And then I spoke aloud. Step by step, I called out the engine temperature warning I'd seen in Hawk 2. The moment Doyle dismissed me, I paused there. This is when I knew I had to keep watching it, I said. Something was wrong, even if no one believed me. I talked through the first gust of wind, how it knocked us sideways. I showed how the flight path of Hawk 2 deviated, how I trimmed the rotors, adjusted for drift, and recalculated terrain based on the rapidly changing GPS altimeter. Then I got to the moment when Doyle collapsed. I replayed the control seizure, the bird starting to dip. I cut the main throttle and switched control override manually, bypassing Doyle's system without protocol. You bypassed the override? One of the instructors asked from the gallery, half rising from his chair. I turned. Yes, sir. No time to request authorization. He was unconscious. He sat back down slowly. Then I took them into the storm, visibility, 0. I engaged terrain radar, switched to emergency navigation, rerouted power from secondary systems to boost avionics. And then came the canyon. I heard gasps behind me when I banked hard left. Saw the altitude drop to single digits. I felt the sim tremble, just like the real bird had. Just like when my shoulder nearly dislocated wrestling the controls. When I leveled out, my hands were shaking for real. I pulled back on the stick, steadied it, and the helicopter flew level. Clean. Alive. I let the sim play out the emergency landing. When the rotor stopped, I took off my headset. The room was quiet. Then someone clapped. Then everyone. It wasn't polite golf claps. It was real. Full applause. From men who didn't applaud. Colonel Reddick, the commander of Eden, stood up. He was a tall man, all square jaw and metals. He looked like a guy who used his own face to chisel granite. Pilot Wren, he said. That was textbook emergency flying. Except they don't put that in any textbook. He looked around the room. Gentlemen, he said, you've just seen the most competent flying I've witnessed in 25 years. Later, someone asked me how it felt to finally be heard. I told them the truth. It felt like I'd stopped whispering into the void, and the sky had whispered back. I see you. 3 days after the simulator debrief, I got the call. Doyle wants to see you, Captain Bowers said, leaning on the doorframe of my bunk like he was trying to gauge my reaction. Is he conscious? Just woke up this morning. Asking for you. I didn't know what to expect walking into the base infirmary. The last time I saw Doyle, he was slumped over the controls, dead weight with sweat pouring down his face and no pulse in his wrist. I hadn't exactly been dreaming of bedside chats. But there he was, sitting up in a hospital cot, looking older than I remembered. The same man who once called me Cupcake in front of half the squad now looked small. Vulnerable, even. He saw me and tried to sit straighter. Winced a little. Wren, he croaked. Captain. I nodded. He gestured to the chair. Sit. I sat, unsure if this was going to be another lecture or a backhanded compliment wrapped in an insult. But Doyle surprised me. I need to say something, he said, eyes locking with mine. I was wrong. I waited. He wasn't finished. I thought I had you pegged from day one. Thought you were just filling some PR spot. I didn't think you had the guts for this. You made that pretty clear, I said. His mouth twitched, maybe a half-smile. I did. And I was wrong. He reached over to the bedside table and picked something up, a small metal object. He held it out. This belonged to my instructor. He gave it to me the day I earned my wings. Been with me for 20 years. I thought I'd pass it on to some kid when I retired. He looked down at it. But you earned it more than I ever did. It was the keychain. The tiny silver rotor blade I'd found in my helmet after the sandstorm. I reached out and took it. It felt heavy, not in weight, but in meaning. You didn't have to, I said. No, Doyle replied. I did. Because respect, real respect, it's not handed out like rations. It's earned. And you earned every ounce. I didn't cry. But something in my chest cracked, just a little. A release valve on a pressure tank that had been building for years. As I stood to leave, Doyle added, Wren, keep flying like that, and one day, people won't be calling it textbook. They'll be calling it Wren Standard. Back at my bunk, I sat alone and stared at the keychain. That night, I didn't trace my birdwing tattoo. I didn't need to. The metal in my hand said everything I'd been fighting for was real. And finally, recognized. A week later, the orders came through. I was being assigned as lead pilot for the Valkyrie Advanced Combat Training Unit. Not as a token, not as a fill-in, as the pilot in command. The name on the assignment slip read Lieutenant Addison Wren, Valkyrie Lead. There was no second name, no co-lead, just mine. When I stepped out onto the tarmac that morning, clipboard in hand, the crew didn't stop talking like they used to. No awkward silences. No side eyes or smirks. They nodded. Some even saluted first. I walked to the chopper that now had my name printed below the cockpit window. I ran my fingers over it like I was still making sure it was real. My bird. My team. No one giving me permission. I'd earned it. My new co-pilot was a fresh-faced lieutenant named Harper Davis. Young. Straight out of flight school. Wide-eyed and a little jittery. He climbed into the bird and strapped in, still stealing glances at me like he was afraid to speak out of turn. You nervous, Lieutenant? I asked as I went through the pre-flight checklist. A little, ma'am, he admitted. I saw the footage. Of the simulator. Of the storm. They're calling it the Wren Protocol now. I looked up. Wren Protocol? Yes, ma'am. Your sandstorm maneuvers are now part of the training curriculum at Eden, and Western Command's pushing it to other bases too. I blinked. That's new. He smiled awkwardly. They say if you want to survive a no-visibility descent, fly like Wren. I looked out the windshield and gave a slow nod. Well, damn. We lifted off with the kind of smoothness I'd only ever felt once before, when my dad first let me take the controls alone on a cloudless evening over open plains. The bird hummed under my fingertips like it knew who was in charge. The training run that day was sharp. Clean. The team followed my instructions with crisp precision, and for the first time in my military career, no one second-guessed my calls. After we touched down, Harper unstrapped and turned toward me. Ma'am, he said, some of the other junior pilots were wondering if you'd consider running a masterclass on emergency flight scenarios. They want to learn from you. Why me? He didn't hesitate. Because you didn't just survive a storm. You commanded it. I leaned back in my seat and stared at the control panel. There it was again, that feeling. Not just of being good, but being trusted. Later that evening, I tucked the tiny keychain Doyle had given me into a drawer next to the old photo of my dad in his flight suit. Both men had taught me something about flying, but only one had taught me what it meant to belong. And now, at last, I did. Word traveled fast. By the end of the month, pilots from other bases were flying in to run through the Wren Protocol on Eden simulators. It had become standard training for sandstorm response, terrain aversion, and zero-visibility landings. My name was etched into manuals, marked next to diagrams, studied in slow-motion replays by pilots who once wouldn't have given me the time of day. But that wasn't the part that hit me. It was when the questions started. Thoughtful ones. Real ones. Lieutenant Wren, when do you decide it's safer to override than to stabilize? Ma'am, what would you do if the co-pilot froze mid-descent? And my favorite, from a pilot I barely knew who stopped me on the way to the hangar. Hey, Wren, how do you stay that calm under pressure? I told him the truth. You don't. You just act like it until the pressure gives up. One morning, I found something new in my locker, another keychain, just like Doyle's. No note. Just a quiet gesture from someone in the squadron, passing the torch again. Only this time, it wasn't a legacy handed down, it was a message sent across. You belong here. You lead here. Harper Davis stuck close during those weeks. Not in a clingy way, he was sharp, observant. a sponge soaking up everything he could. I saw something in him, not just potential. Promise. We were prepping for a dusk run when he pulled me aside, clearly nervous. Ma'am, just wanted you to know. I applied for advanced S-Air training. After working with you, I think that's where I can do the most good. I clapped his shoulder. Then you're already halfway there. His grin could have powered the hangar lights. Later that evening, as I logged hours into my flight journal, I paused and stared at my birdwing tattoo. The ink was a little faded now, sun-beaten and worn. But it still carried the same meaning. It wasn't just a mark of survival. It was a compass. And I was following it straight through the sky. It was the little things that told me Eden had changed. No one made comments when a woman walked into the briefing room anymore. No one rolled their eyes when I spoke during strategy huddles. People started requesting to be on my runs, not because they had to, but because they wanted the kind of calm they knew I'd bring when things went sideways. I wasn't their quota girl anymore. I was their benchmark. Captain Doyle returned to active duty, leaner and quieter than before. I ran into him during a maintenance check. He didn't say much, just nodded and said, "You keeping that bird honest?" "Every day," I replied. He didn't smile, but I saw something shift in his eyes, relief, maybe, or pride. I didn't press. We understood each other now in the way only pilots do after they've cheated death and the same bird. Then one day, something unexpected arrived, a batch of new recruits. Among them, a few women. They weren't wide-eyed or timid. They walked the hangar like they knew where they were going. One of them approached me directly during orientation. "Lieutenant Wren," she asked, sharp salute. I returned it. "That's me. I just wanted to say thank you for making this easier to walk into. Word about you gets around." I gave her a half-smile. "Just did what needed doing." "No, ma'am," she said. "You opened the door we all thought was locked." She walked off before I could respond. I stood there for a moment longer, still as a rotor blade before takeoff. And then I turned back to my chopper, my place, my sky. Later that week, I led a twilight op through rough thermals and unexpected wind shear. My crew handled it like clockwork. Harper called out altitudes. The gunners adjusted torque without being asked. Every person on board trusted the voice in their headset, mine. When we landed, the sun had just dipped behind the mountains. The world glowed in that strange purple stillness. That's when Harper leaned over and said, "Ma'am, rumor is they're renaming the training hangar Wren Hall." I blinked. "You serious?" He nodded. "It's what the brass wants. But the crew's got a better name for it." "Oh yeah." He grinned. "The Nest." I laughed. First real laugh I'd had in months. The Nest. I could live with that. Every now and then, I still visited the old hangar, the one before it was called The Nest. Just a dusty steel skeleton behind the main flight line. No fanfare. No nameplate. But that's where it started for me. Where I sat in a corner with my dry sandwich and the ache in my chest. That day, I brought coffee. Sat on the same bench I'd once cried into my journal. It was quiet. Peaceful in a way it had never been when I first arrived. A familiar voice broke the silence. "Thought I might find you here." It was Colonel Reddick, his face shadowed by the setting sun. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "You did more than stabilize one bird in a storm. You rebalanced the entire base." I shook my head. It wasn't just me. It was 1,000 small choices. From 1,000 hard days. He nodded. "But someone's got to be first through the wall. That was you." Then he pulled something from his pocket, a flight patch. Custom-made. Deep blue with a rising wing pattern and the words, "Fortitude through fire, Valkyrie Unit 1. Harper helped design it. We're making it standard for all new Valkyrie grads." I ran my thumb across the stitching. Clean. Perfect. Earned. "You still think about it?" He asked after a moment. "That day in the storm?" I nodded. "Every time I lift off. Not because I'm afraid, but because I remember what it means to not have control. And how fast it can come back if you trust your hands." He stood. "Well, Wren, you've got something even rarer than flying talent." "What's that?" "Gravity," he said. "You bring people home." I stayed in that hangar a long time after you left, just listening to the ghosts that no longer haunted me, but followed in formation. The silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. 6 months later, I stood on the edge of the tarmac as a new class of Valkyrie cadets lined up. Uniforms crisp, boots unscuffed, dreams bigger than their helmets. I saw myself in them. The awkward posture, the eagerness behind guarded eyes. And for the first time, I felt no bitterness. Only hope. Captain Chen, one of the newest instructors, walked over. She was sharp, no nonsense, a born leader. "Ma'am," she said, nodding toward the recruits. "They asked me who to look up to." I glanced at her sideways. "You tell them to follow the regs?" "I told them to follow the woman who flew blind and brought her crew home." I didn't say anything, just pulled on my gloves, feeling the familiar tug of fabric over scarred knuckles. At the end of the line, one cadet raised her hand. Barely older than 20. Blonde braid tucked under her helmet. "Lieutenant Wren," she said nervously, "we heard you have a saying. Something about storms." I looked at her. Then the others. They weren't mocking. They were listening. I smiled. "The storm isn't the enemy," I said. "Fear is. Fly through it anyway." They held on to that like scripture. Back in the hangar, I climbed into my bird, the same one that had nearly gone down in a sandstorm. The same one that had lifted me out of the wreckage of my doubt. As the engine came to life, I glanced down at my wrist. The birdwing tattoo was faded now, the edges blurred by time and sun and sweat. But it was still there. Still mine. Still me. When we lifted off, I didn't feel the weight of proving myself anymore. Only the lightness of knowing I had nothing left to prove. Above the base, I tilted the nose and punched through the sky. And for the first time since stepping foot on Eden, I felt it fully. Not just belonging, but home.